Thank you, Peter, and good evening, and thank you for being here. As Peter said, my name is Robert Sumwalt. I'm a board member with the National Transportation Safety Board, and joining me is Mr. Mike Hiller, who is the investigator in charge for this accident. The NTSB has launched a full investigative go team to investigate yesterday's train derailment near Graettinger, Iowa. I think most of you know that the NTSB is an independent federal agency charged by Congress to investigate transportation accidents, determine the probable cause, and probably most importantly, to issue safety recommendations to prevent the reoccurrence of those accidents. We're widely known for investigating aviation accidents, and we certainly do that. We investigate all civil aviation accidents in this country, but we also investigate significant transportation accidents in other modes of transportation, and we certainly consider this event of night before last to be a significant transportation event. As I mentioned, the investigator in charge is Mike Hiller, and Mike has nearly 3 decades of rail experience, and he is leading a multidisciplinary team of experts. The team is examining several areas, including the transportation of hazardous materials, the operations of the train, the mechanical condition of the train, track conditions, signal factors, survival factors, and we've even had someone conduct a drone survey using NTSB equipment. So here's the factual information that we have right now. On Friday, March the 10th, about 12:50 a.m., a southbound Union Pacific unit train with 99 cars of ethanol derailed near Graettinger, Iowa. The train originated in Superior, Iowa, and was destined for Texas City, Texas. It was made up of 3 locomotives, 2 on the front end and 1 on the back end, and had 2 buffer cars. So when you're transporting flammable liquids by rail, by federal requirements, there needs to be a non-flammable material car separating the flammable material cars, the tank cars, from the locomotives. And so there was a buffer car on either end of the train separating the flammable fluids, flammable liquids from the locomotives. 20 cars derailed, 15 involved a fire, and presently 2 cars are still burning. The site of the derailment was by a small timber bridge that spanned Jack Creek, and the bridge was destroyed in the accident. The cars that derailed were the 21st through the 40th car behind the front locomotives. They're 30,000-gallon capacity tank cars, and each tank car was filled with about 28,800 gallons of ethanol. At least 4 cars ended up in Jack Creek. Now, speaking of Jack Creek, local environmental and health officials are conducting air, water, and soil monitoring and are taking steps to protect the environment. We have had no evacuations and no injuries. Fire department officials from the Graettinger Volunteer Fire Department are on scene as we speak, managing the post-accident fire. So the train was approaching the bridge at about 30 miles per hour. We know that the engineer was controlling the locomotive by manipulating the throttle. About 90 seconds before the derailment, the throttle was moved to idle. And at about 12:50 a.m., the train went into emergency braking. This was not an engineer-induced emergency braking. There are basically 2 ways that a train can go into emergency. One would be if somebody in the locomotive cab initiates the emergency braking, and another would be by train-induced emergency braking, and that would be when the train starts to separate, the air hoses come apart, and that puts the train into emergency. So what we do know is that this was not an engineer-induced emergency braking. At the time of the emergency brake application, we know that the horn was being sounded, the train horn was being sounded for an upcoming grade crossing. We did today interview the accident train crew as well as the train crew of a train that passed through that area about midday, earlier that day. So of course the accident was a little bit after midnight, but this other train crew that went through operated the train through there midday on Thursday. And neither of these train crews reported seeing any identifiable issues with the track. The engineer and the conductor presented themselves today for an interview. They were very cooperative. The engineer has worked for Union Pacific for 12 years, 10 of which that he's been an engineer. He was a conductor prior to that. He's 35 years old. The conductor has been with the company for 15 years. He is 60 years old. The train was equipped with two recorders, an event recorder, which is required by federal regulations, and a forward-facing video camera, which is not required by regulations. We have viewed the forward-facing video and nothing remarkable. It may be that in other derailment scenarios we've been able to use that video to identify a pre-existing problem with the track. Nothing was remarkable from viewing that video. And we've also done a preliminary look at the event recorder. You always want to take a quick look at it while we're on scene, but the real detailed analysis of each of those recorders will occur at NTSB's headquarters in our recorders lab in Washington, D.C., and they are being sent to Washington, D.C. as we speak. Our investigators have also examined sections of the track on either end of the derailment site to check for compliance with federal regulations. The next few days will be very busy. Our investigators will work on scene to thoroughly document the accident site and gather additional factual information. And so far, our access to the scene has been limited, somewhat limited due to the existing fires, but as conditions permit, we will be looking for any remarkable damage that will tell the story of why this derailment occurred. Looking for any pre-existing damage that might exist on either the tracks or with the rail cars, the tank cars themselves. Our investigators will continue to examine and document breaches and damage to the tank cars. And our mission, our reason for being here, is to not only understand what happened, we know what happened, there was a derailment, we want to find out why it happened so that we can keep it from happening again. And while on scene, we're not here to speculate, to come up with the cause of the accident. We're just here to collect what I consider to be the perishable evidence. That's the information that goes away with the passage of time. So we know we're looking for some snow tomorrow. People's memories fade, things like that. They want to get the Union Pacific obviously wants to get that track up and running again. So the information that's out there today won't be there in a few weeks. So our goal for being on scene is to collect the perishable evidence, the perishable information, that information that goes away with the passage of time. But again, we're not here to determine the cause. That comes in due time as a part of our investigative process. Mike Hiller told me a little while ago that we've received outstanding support, those are his words, outstanding support from the first responders. And he's also told me that we've received great cooperation from the Federal Railroad Administration and also from Union Pacific. And I think it's evident that we all share the goal of improving safety. I do want to spend a moment just talking about the NTSB's concerns with transporting flammable liquids in tank cars that are not optimal for such shipments. Although legal by today's standards, by today's federal regulations, the NTSB has identified a number of crashworthiness vulnerabilities, associated with the legacy DOT 111 tank cars. The standards were revised in the last 2 years following a number of accidents. And I'll talk to you for a moment about these newer standards. But I want to say that the issue of transporting flammable materials is on the NTSB's most wanted list and has been for the last 3 years. It's something that we are very concerned about. The newer standards, newer requirements, which have a phase-in period depending on the type of commodity that's being transported. It's called a DOT 111 specification tank car. It is specifically designed to reduce the vulnerabilities that we've talked about, to improve puncture resistance, and to increase resistance to thermal failures and energetic fireball releases. We have investigated several prior accidents where these DOT 111 tank cars have been used. And we feel that had the newer standard been in use, the severity of the accident would not be as great. Compared to the newer specification, DOT 111 tank cars, these older legacy DOT 111 tank cars have a thinner shell. The shell is almost 30% thinner on these DOT 111 tank cars than they are the newer specification cars. Almost 30% thinner, and furthermore, the steel that's being used on them is not nearly as strong as that being used in the DOT 117 cars. They have unprotected top and bottom fittings. They will be better protected with the newer specification. The consequences of these unprotected top and bottom fittings is that during a derailment, these fittings can be sheared off, which breaches the tank car and spills product and literally fueling a fire. There's no protective outer shell on these older cars like there is on the newer tank cars. There's no thermal protection on these older tank cars. And there's no head shields on either end of the tank car. So in these newer tank cars, the 117 tank cars, it has a thicker head shield. That's on the front and the back of the car. It's a thicker material. And so that minimizes the likelihood of a breach during the derailment when the tank cars are crashing into each other and the couplers are riding up and banging into each other. So these are things that Congress has required and the DOT has implemented to protect the transport of flammable materials by rail. But there's a phase-out schedule. So when transporting crude oil, for example, these DOT 111 tank cars, the older tank cars, cannot be used for transporting crude oil after this time next year. But for ethanol, the phase-out period for these 111s is not until May of 2023. We're concerned about that. So yes, we are concerned about continued use of the DOT 111 tank cars for use in transporting flammable materials, such as ethanol. So I'll wrap up the accident briefing by saying that Mr. Hiller's investigative team will be here on scene for probably 5 or 7 days, continuing to collect that perishable information. This will be our only on-scene press briefing. The information concerning this accident from here out will be coordinated by the NTSB's Office of Media Relations in Washington, D.C. Meanwhile, you may follow us on Twitter for the latest update, and that Twitter handle, we have two. The one to watch is this one. It's at NTSB_newsroom. So again, that's at NTSB_newsroom. So that's the end of the briefing. I'll be glad to take questions, and if you would kindly raise your hand when I call on you, state your name and your affiliation. So thank you very much. Any questions from the room? Great. Any questions from the telephone?
Hi, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
This is Marjorie Beck with the Associated Press. I appreciate your letting me call in. I would ask you if you could repeat about the cars. You said 20 cars derailed, is that correct?
Yeah, Marjorie from the AP is wanting to know how many cars derailed, and I want to make sure that I look at my notes here, and Mike knows it off the top of his head, but I want to get it right. And my cards are all backwards now. Was it 20? 20 cars derailed. So Marjorie, 20 cars derailed. 15 involved a fire, and 2 cars are still burning.
Right. Have you been able to determine at all whether ethanol has spilled into Jack Creek or any other surrounding area?
Yes, the ethanol did leak into the Jack Creek, and of course it leaked from the 20 It leaked from some of the cars that breached.
Yeah, they're still in the process of making an assessment of the number of breached cars and an assessment of the amount of product.
So could you hear that? That was Mike Heller, and he said that we're making an assessment of the actual number of breached cars, including the amount of product that has leaked from those cars.
Okay. So you don't have an idea at this point of how much has spilled?
And Marjorie's question is, do we have a question of how much product has leaked? And the answer to that is no, because in order to do that, we've got to get up, our investigators have to get up close and personal and actually get inside the tank car to measure how much product is remaining, and they can't get that close to a few of the cars yet because of the ongoing fire.
Right. Have you been able to get an idea whether most of the ethanol has burned off? I mean, the fire's been going for more than 36 hours now.
Yes, has most of the ethanol burned off, and most of it has, but there's still these remaining 2 fires that are going, and I think the fire department has tried to, I think they've determined at this point that the best option is to just allow it to burn off. Mike, or are they still actively fighting it?
I think it's still a monitoring situation right now, and the expectation is that the fire should be suppressed by tonight, and we'll have access by tomorrow morning.
Marjorie, could you hear that okay?
I did, thank you.
Yes, you're welcome.
I know that you won't have a definitive answer for a while, and I think I know the answer to this, but I would ask if you have any inkling at this point what would have caused the derailment.
Well, and the question is, do we have any idea of what caused it? And so the answer to that is, I think a good investigative technique, and I've been at the board now for about 10 and a half years, and I did some aviation accident investigation prior to that. And I feel like, in my opinion, the best investigative technique is not to go in with any preconceived notions. If you go in with preconceived notions, you're going to find those things. And so what we want to do is go in with a very open mind. At this stage, we're strictly in the business of collecting the factual information, looking, documenting, and then we will begin a very careful process of analyzing that. So to answer your question, we're not here really to speculate. We never want to speculate. So that's the long and the short of that.
Okay. The last thing I'd ask you is whether you spent a bit of time talking about the legacy tankers that were used, and I understand you to say they were used in this train that derailed, correct?
Yeah, so I probably didn't make that point extremely clearly. What type of tank cars were in this train consist, and each of the cars that are involved in the pileup In fact, each of the cars in the entire train consist were the legacy DOT 111 tank cars.
Okay. Is there anything, like I said, you spent some time talking about this in the NTSB opinions of these cars and the danger that they pose transporting things like ethanol. And you mentioned the deadline of 2023. Is there anything the NTSB can do, or is it considering doing to maybe move up those deadlines, or
And the question,
shippers?
yeah, the question is,
Sorry, to follow up on that, to get shippers to maybe beat the deadline.
the question basically, and I appreciate the question very much, those deadlines, is there anything the NTSB can do to move up those deadlines? And the answer is those deadlines were set by Congress through the FAST Act in December of 2015. And then the PHMSA, Federal Pipeline and Hazardous Material Safety Administration, in conjunction with the Federal Railroad Administration, released a rule to promulgate that. That came out in May of 2016. It's called the HM 251. So the bottom line is that those deadlines have been set by Congress and regulated by the DOT. The NTSB does not have regulatory authority. We held a tank car safety forum in July of last year, and I had the privilege of moderating that tank car forum. And we've learned that when it comes to crude oil, there's hardly any shippers at all, if any. When it comes to crude oil, no one to speak of is using these legacy DOT 111 tank cars. And we've had a number of very significant tank car crude oil derailments that led to spectacular fires. So what I think may have happened is a lot of emphasis got on not transporting crude by rail. But meanwhile, people have forgotten about the potential hazard of transporting ethanol using these DOT 111 tank cars. And let me be clear, transporting flammable materials by rail can be perfectly safe, and it's a great mode of transport. But we think that these DOT 111 tank cars, that's the weak link in the system. So that's why we would hope that the shippers would revert to upgrading. There's two options. They can replace the DOT 111 tank cars when used in flammable liquids, or they can retrofit them to almost the existing standards. So we would like to see the shippers accelerate their schedule to get these legacy 111 tank cars out of the service when transporting flammable liquids, specifically crude oil and ethanol. So I'll take one more question, Marjorie, if you've got any more.
That's actually all I have. I appreciate your help.
I want to thank you so much for calling in. Fox 44, do you have any questions?
Did the alcohol affect the land by any chance? Any damage to the land or to the water?
So the question is, does the alcohol affect the land or the water? And the environmental officials are conducting oxygen sampling to make sure that a level of oxygen is not deteriorated to a toxic level for the water to kill fish or otherwise. They have not found, so far it is below the level that they would consider to be toxic. And as far as the soil is concerned, yes, we do know that ethanol has gone into the soil because when the tank car is breached and burned, it got into the soil. So what will happen there is the soil will be scooped up and taken to a place where it can be basically quarantined and not remain there. So that will be the last question, unless you have another one. I want to thank you all. I want to thank again the great cooperation of the first responders and the Federal Railroad Administration and the UP. And our goal, we have this saying at the NTSB that from tragedy we draw knowledge to improve safety for us all. Fortunately, the event that happened on Friday morning was not tragic in the sense of any lives lost. Our public relations team, media affairs, we just came from a tragedy in Mississippi where lives were lost. So here's one where fortunately lives were not lost, but nevertheless, we want to prevent these sorts of things from happening. I want to thank you for being here. I wish you great success in your investigation. Having worked with your team of professionals, I'm very confident that you will come up with recommendations that will, in fact, improve the transportation of flammables by rail. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Robert.
Thank you.